Welcome to the world of VillageNama. We have with us today Mr. Sandip Das, who is a veteran food and agriculture analyst for the last 20 years. But before I start pestering Mr. Das, let me tell the viewers also what VillageNama is about. We started VillageNama with a view to dwell more attention on 55% of India's population who live in the rural world, which amounts to about 80 crore plus of Indians. And since our think tanks, our intellectuals, our media, our academicians, they are all by and large city based, for no fault of theirs, they don't dwell upon the village world as much as the village world needs attention. So, with a view to repair this lack of attention on our village world, VillageNama is a valiant attempt. Having said this, Mr. Das, since you are a veteran analyst, let me start off by saying that since 1947, since we attained independence, our agricultural output has gone up from 50 million to 350 million tons. Our horticultural output has also crossed 300 million tons. Our dairy revolution has been so much that all of Russia's dairy sector needs is fulfilled purely by the Indian dairy sector, because Russia now faces Western sanctions. So, in this light, we have done quite a bit. Indians are not dying of hunger anymore. But having said that, in your view, what would be the two positive developments in Indian agriculture in the last 75 years and two negative factors which still make us comparatively backward?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and we have traveled a long way in terms of food security, food grain production, horticulture crop production, dairy, as you mentioned, basically from a very highly food deficient economy. 70s onwards, we conceived that food green revolution, and from there we have almost like our food grain production is 320 million tons last year essentially. So that we have managed to grow our grain, essentially rice, wheat, and other crops phenomenally well, and essentially we have managed at least reduce our import dependence quite considerably. Essentially, at least food grain we don't import largely. We haven't imported any chunk of import. But what has happened, because of the rural economy, because of the fragmented land holding we have over the years, our small farmers yield in terms of income has gone down essentially. Although we have achieved quite a bit of success in terms of providing food security to almost like currently we are providing 16 million tons of grain to almost like 800 million people annually, which almost like $2 billion, 2 lakh crore rupees of food security provide. We have managed to provide without importing any grain. So that is a huge achievement, but because of the fragmented land holding, quite a lot of challenges remains, and because small land holding lead to less income for the farmers. And over the years, what has happened, successive government policy has been to control price so that our inflation remains under remains low.
Yeah.
And that is leading to the disconnect between the production and the consumption base. So that is leading to many of the time farmers selling their commodity, distress sale and all, and it's become quite frequent in terms of. So that is hitting our farmers' income, and as long as we don't provide farmers adequate income, so we continue to see people shifting out of agriculture essentially. So that progress we have made. And about the specific part of your question, I must say that we are the biggest milk producer in the world since 1998, and we are the second biggest producer of rice, and biggest producer of. We are exporting 21 million tons of rice last year, 22 million tons this 22-23 fiscal. 45% of the global trade of rice is controlled by India essentially. So and another data I want to give that in 22-23 $2 billion worth of fresh fruits and vegetables were exported. So that's a nutshell, but our income remains, that is a big challenge in terms of smallholder farmer how to
Right.
increase the farmer because they constitute about 80% of the farming community, roughly around 14 crore farm families we have in the country.
Right, Mr. Das. Thank you. But now let us go to the other side. Our agricultural output has gone up tremendously. Horticultural output has gone up tremendously. Dairy output has gone up tremendously. Our aquaculture output has also gone up tremendously. And even though 55% of we Indians live in the villages, our GDP is still made up largely by wealth accumulation and wealth generation in the urban areas. Agriculture sector as a whole does not contribute as much to the GDP as it should. So therefore, what we need to do is to diversify agriculture, improve marketing, and make it into a massively export oriented industry. In fact, I would say that we should treat the farmer as a commercial model and not merely as an annadata, because the farmer has got as much right to earn more as, say, the IT sector guy staying in Bangalore and earns lakhs and lakhs of rupees. So, in order to have this geometrical improvement in the rural situation, what would be the 2 or 3 policy initiatives, Mr. Das, that you would like to see being operationalized by the government?
Essentially, if you look at currently, if you look at our export basket, about $50 billion of export to food and allied products we have done in the last 2020 to 23 fiscal, and we are currently major supplier of produce of agriculture produce to Middle East countries essentially, and it's going to rise. The idea is to how to have a backhand our value chain has to be developed. For that, we need to have like consolidation of land holding for the agriculture purpose, because this subject in our country has been very controversial in terms of, people will take away your land if you go for contract farming and all. But ultimately, if you look at the contract farming is the way forward, and how the model of contract farming has been issued by the government. Farmers need landholding support, both in terms of it's just not about producing commodity. How you quality of the produce is also important, and how to sell it at the market. So essentially, what has happened, because of the smallholder farming, farmers, the aggregator, we need a more aggregator at the village level.
Right.
So there, who can be an aggregator? There may be FPOs and all. They can be aggregator, and because government thrust on creating FPOs, farmer producer organization, that has taken up. Although I understand that many of will be failure in terms of, because suddenly farmers cannot be a marketing guy and marketing their commodities. The FPOs model is a way forward, I think, and also the many of the access to a credit to the farmers is still. Currently, the access to credit of the farmers is very limited because obvious reason that he has a very little landholding essentially. So, how do we invest in agriculture essentially more?
So your point is that if we have contract farming amongst the farmers, then the economy of scale goes up so much that their access to credit goes up, their access to marketing goes up, their strength of negotiating with the banker, with the market, and with the consumer, all three goes up. Absolutely. And they cannot be exploited to the extent that sometimes they are exploited today. For example, I read in the papers today that capsicum output has grown so much in Punjab that there is not enough buyer for it. So therefore, the poor farmer is laden with surplus capsicum which is unable to sell. Had all the farmers been united under contract farming, they could have done better grading and exported it to the world outside, because the world outside does believe in having boutique vegetables like capsicum and things like that.
And correct, because what has happened, the mismatch between production and the consumption, especially in the horticulture crop, essentially that include capsicum as well, tomato and capsicum. You see often reports of tomato being thrown in the field, and even recently also many of the farmers in Uttar Pradesh, they had to abandon their potato crop in their field essentially, because they did not get priced for transportation to the nearest mandis. how to deal with that? Essentially, to deal with that, we need to have a tie-up with the companies, tie up the companies to buyback arrangement, and so that and also the critical challenges in our agriculture marketing system is that which the electronic national electronic mandi system is trying to evolve is that
E-mandis.
e-mandis through interstate trade. Still,
Right.
many of the laws are very restricted in terms of if you want to, if you're sitting in Karnataka, you want to buy from UP, it's a lot of restriction in terms of getting a localized license and all. So that
So you need to reform the agricultural marketing system.
agriculture market, and it has process is started and a lot of things have happened, because if you don't just producing a commodity, just suppose example is a tomato. If you produce only tomato, it's not going to give you income.
Yeah.
It has to be processed. Today, India's production, if I seeing a data, something around 6% of our tomato is processed.
Yeah.
And that's a huge opportunity exists for the tomato is used all over the globe. And tomato puree, is tomato paste and all basically. But you need a varietal of tomato, that kind of tomato. So that is where buyback arrangement takes place. And many of them are taking place. If you look at recently one of the big FPOs in Maharashtra, they have been supplying to the Sahyadri farms, you must have heard.
Yes.
They have been supplying tomatoes to the many of the big corporates, Kisan and other people. So that kind of model has to be put, which is FPOs have to play a role, because FPO have a little bit of trust issue, because that bodies is created by the farmers themselves. But there you need to have a handholding support, which currently government providing for some time in terms of financial support to the POs. But there we need to do a lot of work and value addition. If you don't do value addition, it's not going to help us getting more income from the farm produce.
So, Mr. Das, there's one confusion in my mind which you please try to clear. Is the villager merely a producer, a kind of an annadata for the consumer in the cities, or is the villager partly producer, partly consumer? If he is also consumer, is the dice loaded against him? If I might give an example here, if I am a marginal farmer or a landless labor and I make enough for my 100 days of consumption needs, I still need food grains for another 265 days. For that, I do mehnat as a labor, as a farmhand, as a road construction laborer. But with my earnings, I then go to the market to buy atta chawal for the next 265 days of the year. Atta chawal in the meantime goes up every year because the MSP demands of the owner cultivator is so much and so irresistible that the government is forced to keep on increasing the MSP, and then the government buys most of the wheat and paddy from the market gets denuded, so then the open market price of atta and chawal also keeps going up. So the consumer in the poor villager has to pay much more than his meager earnings as an agricultural laborer or as a road construction laborer, etc., etc.
Correct, because the pharmacy is ultimately a consumer also, essentially, and from his field or his or her field, you cannot get a income to sustain the entire year, essentially, because of the small holding farming, and so it has to depend on the other sources. If you look at the many of the surveys done by the government, a large chunk of farm income is coming from the non-farming sector, essentially.
Yeah.
One of the non-farming sector is although allied sector. The dairy is emerged as one of the non-farming allied sector, because you don't need a land for doing a dairy, and also they work in other as a labor, because you don't need that the small patch of land doesn't engage with the entire year, essentially. So that also they depend on the National Food Security Act for subsidized food grain, and they depend on the NREGA for some manual work. So the pharmacy is also a consumer, essentially, and many of the, as I told you before also, we said this, that our rural economy is quite rural economy plays a critical role in terms of consumption of FMCG products.
So when we talk about rural economy, now tell me, our agriculture, horticulture output keeps going up, and yet even though 55% of us Indians live in the villages, the contribution of the rural economy to the GDP is not enough, which means that all the wealth that is being generated is being generated in the urban areas. So therefore, how do we enable this this 55% of Indians living in the villages have their share of the GDP pie, which at the moment is much less than what their population would entitle them to.
Roughly, the statistics show that about 55% of the people are engaged in agriculture, but their contribution to GDP about 15 to 16%. So, the large chunk of our 20% GDP coming from the services sector essentially. So, that how do that services sector? That is where critical point is that you need to have a land conservation, you need to have a processing part, and a value chain development, because we are successful in dairy to an extent, because dairy is still confined to a few states like Gujarat, Karnataka, and some other states. There are long way to go essentially. Just because they invest on the value chain essentially, the processing part of it essentially, because producing is just one part of the entire value chain from consumer to farmers. The processing, storage facility, those kind
that has to be improved.
That has to be improved so that we get a access. As I said, that our allied sector growth has been fastest in terms of poultry and fisheries and all. Just because we have invested in the, but still there is a lot of investment required to be done in terms of poultry and livestock sectors essentially. So that farmers income goes up, and contract farming, although it has to be little, less, it has to be made less controversial essentially. People, eyebrows are there, contract farming, they'll take away the land and all. It's not not that actually. It's just about a contract between the buyer and the purchaser basically. And currently also a lot of contract farming is happening basically. So that is where value addition has to come in. Then and FPOs and land consolidation. Then only we can have a better farm income essentially.
So one final thought for the day or today is that industrialization and urbanization in the whole world is basically 100 to 150 years old. Each one of us, our ancestors came from the villages, but our ancestors left the villages to come to the cities because they saw more opportunities in the cities. The industries would absorb them, the service sector would absorb them, but sometimes what happens is that there is more rural out-migration than the cities can absorb. So that leads to a chaotic, unplanned growth of the cities, where you have large number of floating population who don't have any regular means of livelihood and therefore are called unemployed. So in that sense, would you call rural out-migration inevitable? Would you call it unavoidable? Would you call it good so that industrialization takes place? Would you call it bad because they come from the villages to the cities, don't find jobs, but they hang on in the cities because in the villages they are just not getting enough income?
This is inevitable. All over the world it happens. People will be leaving agriculture essentially and moving into the cities and as industrialization grows, because by nature, by system, we cannot absorb so many people in agriculture essentially.
Right.
In terms of both economically, sustainability and economically, we cannot sustain it essentially. That's correct. People will shift out of agriculture and as I told you before also, that today also 40% of agricultural land that depend on tenancy farming. That creates land owned by you, but somebody else does the cultivation. So tenancy means, for me, it's technically a contract farming basically. Somebody else is doing that. So that is a natural phenomenon. But our industrialization has been little regional disparity in industrialization. Large chunk of our industry in the western and southern part of the country, and northern part is very Delhi and some of the other places. Delhi and NCR is the big industrial hub. So essentially, that is leading to a lot of people from UP Bihar coming to Delhi for work, because if we would have industrialization geographically spread over, that would have helped us in this. So that is what government has to do. Government has, in terms of connectivity, have improved. So I think next couple of years will be great in terms of both, because we have connectivity, road, telecommunication. So that will help boost industrialization and many of the and also skilling of the people.
Okay.
That has to happen essentially.
Thank you, Mr. Das. It's been wonderful talking to you. Much of the confusion has been cleared, but doubts as always remain and new doubts are created. We hope to see you again another time.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.